Thank you. Welcome to today's Raleigh City Council work session, calling the meeting to order. As you know, the city manager sent us all a memo yesterday, and also the chief. I hope you've read that in preparation for today's meeting. And that's the first item we had added to the agenda. I'm going to hand this over to the city manager for comment first.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I wanted to make a few comments before we talk about some additional next steps that we're going to be doing. First of all, the events of the last several days have been heartbreaking and devastating for our entire community. We are facing a crisis at all levels, local, state, nationally, and we are working really hard to respond to the challenges that have been identified, and we respect the rights of everyone to express their voices. We fully intend to review the events of the last 10 days and report back to the Mayor and Council as quickly as possible. We welcome all opportunities for improvement. And so to that end, I want to talk about a few of our next steps that we're going to be doing, action items, before handing it over to the police chief to talk about some specifics. First, we are going to conduct an events review report. We will conduct a full review of all the events from the last 10 days with a special focus of the events of Saturday, March the 30th and May the 30th and Sunday, May the 31st. The report will include a summary of the incidents, the use of force and rationale, coordination with our other public safety agencies, resources used at the events, and areas identified for improvement moving forward. Second, we are going to bring in an outside panel of experts. Police Chief Dick Brown has proposed bringing in this outside law enforcement expert group to conduct an independent review of recent events. The purpose is to objectively review our response and provide a comprehensive assessment of our actions. These experts will be in high demand as many events have been occurring across the country, so we're going to need to move quickly to bring them on board. We don't have any specifics or details today, so we will update you on our progress at your next council meeting. Third, our entire city staff is supportive and open to reviewing policies and receiving feedback from the Police Advisory Board once they're appointed and ready to begin work. And so we are happy to do that work at whatever the proper time that you would like us to do so. So those are a few of the next steps that we are moving forward and intend to take. So finally, what I'd like to do is take some time today, along with the police chief, to go over several areas of policy changes that have been already proposed. There are two categories. There were a list of 4 items that was requested by the council at your June 2nd meeting, and then there was another request from your council meeting on June the 4th, the 8 can't wait items. I'd like to ask our police chief, Cassandra Dick Brown, to come forward and go over these items one at a time and indicate our next steps and our commitment towards implementation. So with that, I'll ask Chief Dick Brown to step forward and walk us through each of those individual items.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come before you. We're not there yet. Basically, I wanted to speak specifically in response to the action steps as it relates to our police policy, and more specifically regarding the manager's statement regarding the recent demonstration event. And I want to speak more specifically to areas that both Council Member Stewart brought up, 4 topical areas, as well as Mayor Baldwin's request to look at the 8 can't wait. The Raleigh Police Department's policies that are specific to these matters are primarily found in 2 policies. One is 110801, as it pertains to the use of force and weapons. And the other is 1104-4, compliance with laws, regulations, and orders. As an accredited agency, the Raleigh Police Department must maintain accurate and timely records regarding the use of force and the amount of force that the officers deploy. Early warning systems allow the organization to intervene and correct potential negative behavior when officers have 3 or more incidents of force used occurring within a 3-month period of time. The early warning system is also used when an officer receives 2 or more complaints within a 3-month period of time. The early warning system is not designed to be punitive. However, it does work in conjunction with whatever discipline has been administered, as well as looking at other various programs to reduce stress and identify the employee deficiencies and performance deficiencies as well. The 8 Can't Wait project is a project by Campaign Zero, and it's created in efforts to reduce police violence through agency adoption and implementation of the 8 Can't Wait principles. On their website, they identify police agencies throughout the United States and a number of the policies and practices that are implemented, with an explanation of what the agency's policy is and whether or not it meets the criteria stipulated in the 8 Can't Wait model. To take a closer look, of the 8 recommendations, the Raleigh Police Department meets 5 of the 8 policy topics with specific language in the policy that speaks to this topic. The remaining 3 topics are addressed in policy and in training, but are not as explicitly noted as the others are. So what I want to do is take a moment to go through the first 5 and then to further address the remaining 3. Beginning with, and so you see the checks on the screen. The 3 yellow checks are where we speak to it, but those are also the 3 that they said that we did not meet the criteria. So I will speak to those 3 last and begin with the use of force continuum. So those green checks are the ones that we did meet. In our policy, the use of force continuum clearly delineates the levels of force, from the lowest being a physical presence to deadly force, to include the definition at each of the levels as well. And our policies go into more of the details specific to these areas. So I am just really offering a high-level comment to these areas. Requires warning before shooting. And what our policy states in this regard is, if feasible, an officer will issue a verbal warning before resorting to deadly force, while also recognizing that a verbal warning might not be possible in a split second. That is indeed noted within that policy. Requires exhaust all other means before shooting. Our policy addresses that officers should use a firearm as a last resort when all other means have failed or are inapplicable. Duty to intervene. It shall be the duty of every officer of this agency to attempt to prevent any officer from using unwarranted, reckless, or excessive force. They are further directed to report the same as well. And requires comprehensive reporting. Incidents involving the discharge of a firearm or the use of force with or without a weapon. Hands can be a weapon. Body parts can be a weapon, as we've seen. Must be reported and documented. The 3 remaining areas are addressed in our policies, and they are also incorporated in our basic and annual training as well. However, there is room to shore up these policies to be more specific. Bans chokeholds and strangleholds. Our policy speaks to chokeholds and lateral vascular neck restraint as a significant use of force and could be considered as a use of deadly force. Referenced in our policy is to avoid it, but it does not ban it. Today, we will begin recrafting this policy to ban chokeholds and strangleholds. Requires de-escalation. Our policy references the need to evaluate to determine the need to escalate the force used, to de-escalate the force used, or to disengage from the use of force. There is clearly room to improve this policy as well, as there are other opportunities where de-escalation may be a greater advantage where there is no issue of force at all. And then the third area is to restrict shooting at moving vehicles. Our policy prohibits shooting at a moving vehicle, except in limited circumstances. For example, when there is a deadly threat from the inside of the vehicle, or when an officer or third party is in the path of the vehicle, and there is no ability to move outside of that path of the vehicle. So those three areas where we did not get the recommendation or the identification that it met their criteria, in addition to the remaining 5, we are going to reevaluate all of our policies to ensure that they are very forward in ensuring that they are the best practices possible. Last year, the Raleigh Police Department placed its policies online for public access. Since then, our City of Raleigh has launched a new website, and our Raleigh Police Department's Communications Office, along with the City of Raleigh Communications Office, are working to enhance the portal so that we can ensure that there is greater access and an easier access to the public as it relates to those policies. Today, we did make happen a link of the Raleigh police policies to be moved to the landing page of the City of Raleigh website so that there is easier access. What we also added was, historically it says written directives, and you see today it says police policies and procedures, so it allows for an easier recognition as well. Additional policy recommendations came from Council Member Stewart, and they pertain to the Good Samaritan rule, 3 strikes rule, the type of force used against Mr. George Floyd, knee to the neck, and a list of all training currently provided by the Raleigh Police Department, or to the Raleigh Police Department. As we evaluated both recommendations from the mayor as well as Council Member Stewart, what we did find is that some of the recommendations do overlap. So I'll begin with the Good Samaritan rule, which requires that officers who witness bad behavior, it requires that they intervene. This is very similar to the duty to intervene, where we have already noted that it shall be the duty of every officer of this agency to attempt to prevent any other officer from using unwarranted, reckless, or excessive force. They are further directed to report same. This is also taught in the legal classes as well as the ethics classes. Legal classes are taught by City Attorney's Office. The ethics block is taught by the Chief of Police. The 3 strikes rule, to make sure police officers with a long record of complaints or come with complaints from other agencies are tracked. I want to speak just a little bit on this. When it comes to hiring, basically you would be talking about hiring a lateral employee from another agency. One thing that we require, and I require as chief, is that when we conduct a background on a lateral applicant, that a Raleigh police officer visits that agency and looks directly into that file as part of the background investigation. We want to make sure that we are personally looking at any complaints, any internal investigations, suits, etc. So we do place eyes and we do travel regardless of where that individual is coming from. The chief of police makes all final hiring decisions. A polygraph is conducted on all police applicants with a psychological evaluation as well. In terms of current employees, I mentioned in the other part of this presentation about the early warning system, which takes a look at the uses of force. And so we look at those, and not only do we look at those, but the early warning system allows us to also monitor those. And that's where you're looking at the number of uses of force within a given amount of time. And that's where we then have, we make sure that we are able to intervene, if not before then. But this clearly is laid out as another option and opportunity, not an option, but an opportunity to ensure that we are identifying those individuals who are showing potential patterns of practice. The type of force used against Mr. George Floyd, knee to neck, is not used in Raleigh. We have the policy that identifies this type of force is deadly, and that the chokehold or the lateral vascular neck restraint is a significant use of force and can be considered as a use of deadly force. So there, as I mentioned earlier, where we put in our file, in our policy that we reference to avoid this type of force, we will be banning this force. A list of all training currently provided by the Raleigh Police Department. A training curriculum is developed every year that consists of both mandatory and supplemental training within our department. Additionally, specific training inside as well as offered training that is offered outside of the Raleigh Police Department, in-house, out-of-house, may also become available to individuals throughout the year due to specialties as well as assignments. Basic and in-service training is mandated by the State of North Carolina Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission. All mandatory in-service training must be completed by December 31st of each year. The failure to complete same will result in the suspension of the law enforcement officer certification, and that is a mandate by the State of North Carolina. I do want to take a moment from a previous meeting that I had earlier today to share some additional questions that or answers that have come up regarding training. The North Carolina Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission requires a little more than 600 hours for basic law enforcement training in the state of North Carolina. The Raleigh Police Department offers over 1,200 hours of basic training for any officer to become a Raleigh police officer. In addition to the training, CIT training is given to every recruit upon graduation, and that is a 40-hour block as well. Actually 2 years ago, Training and Standards actually increased the number of classroom hours for basic law enforcement from 8 hours to 24 hours. CIT training as it relates to the Raleigh Police Department, approximately 440 officers are currently CIT certified. In addition to that, we have approximately 40 officers who have completed another 16-hour course that teaches where veteran CIT officers teach military veterans and first responders about CIT as well. So that's a different topic, veterans CIT training. Mental health first aid was actually taught in 2017 to the entire department, sworn and civilian, which is an 8-hour block pertaining to mental health, mental illness. We continue to offer CIT training, that is in partnership with our mental health practitioners and providers, as well as our community college. And then we also, and these are just some of the areas to highlight, but we also taught all of our staff, sworn and civilian ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Some of you may be familiar with that, as it was offered by a number of entities throughout our county as well, to include our the Wake County Health Department. Several other topics that we offer our personnel as it relates to mental health is coping with stress and PTSD, communication skills with persons in crisis and de-escalation, protecting our officers, suicide prevention for law enforcement, critical incident stress debriefing, mental illness awareness with our police psychologist, responding to individuals with mental health, awareness of issues surrounding returning military personnel, suicide by cop and force options, emotional survival for law enforcement officers, interacting with special populations, and the CIT overview. Training is paramount in this organization as the chief of police. And so we always are seeking opportunities to ensure that our officers receive as much training as we can possibly get to them to further promote greater interactions with our community, building relationships with our community as well, understanding and working through cultural and other cultural differences and other diversities, as well as identifying the mentally ill as well, and recognizing what resources may be available. Training is not a one time training is not something that's given at one time and we don't do it again. It's continuous within our department, so it's not a one-time occurrence with us. So it's constantly evaluated as situations change, as legislation changes. We try to make sure that our officers and our staff are clearly apprised of what those changes are, and it's infused in training as well. In addition to reality-based training, where there are critical decision-making opportunities and the opportunity to de-escalate. So you may have a situation where there is actually a scenario and there's got to be a decision remedied and the problem solved. And sometimes personnel are put into those scenarios where there really isn't a crisis, and they have to be able to understand that and articulate why they took action or did not take action given those circumstances. In the Raleigh Police Department, our mission is basically in the spirit of service. The Raleigh Police Department exists to preserve and improve the quality of life, instill peace, and protect property through unwavering attention to our duties in partnership with the community. That is ongoing. We will continue to strive to make sure that we hit every point as it relates to that mission. As Chief of Police, I clearly don't want to see anything like what we just saw occur within our department or what we've seen across the United States. We do strive to be the best department that we can be. And as an accredited department, policy does matter, and I believe that it does make a difference in terms of what we do and how we do it. We will continue to evaluate policy. We will also work with the Police Advisory Board as it relates to policies and procedures as well, to ensure that we are trying our best to put the best foot forward and the best practices in place. So we must and we will, in efforts, ensure that we are better. As I stated before, and I've said this several times publicly, reform starts with us. Reform starts with the chief of police in an organization, as well as the individuals who make up that organization. As I mentioned earlier, while these 8 critical areas are found in 2 of our policies within our department, we will and we can stand these areas up in any other policy as well. So this gives us the opportunity to further evaluate where these points could be instituted and inserted into other policies, so that it becomes more of a reiteration as we are applying the specifics of policy. Are there any questions?
Let's see, Counselor Stewart and then Counselor Branch. Counselor Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thank you so much for this information and for your quick action to start us moving down some better procedures, and I really appreciate it. One of the questions that has been brought up to my attention within the last week, but also previously, is what kind of consequences or enforcement is in place if an officer violates one of our policies. So just curious if there's an answer to that, or if that's something we need to work on.
No, I can speak to that. Officers are disciplined and disciplined routinely. So poor behavior, misconduct is not an acceptable practice within the organization. What I think is often, and maybe we need to do a better job in educating our community, but what is often concerning for the greater community is when we talk about, if you see something, say something, complain. Let us know if you are seeing bad behavior by our officers or misconduct. When we respond back to the complainant, we do submit a letter to them, and we let them know whether their complaint has been sustained or not sustained. If, in fact, the issue has been deemed unfounded, or if there's a policy failure. What is often questioned is, well, what exactly did you do to that person? And because of personnel law, we are unable to speak specifically about how that individual employee was disciplined. And so we're unable to do that. And Robin may want to shed a little light on this, but I know that creates some frustration in the greater community at times, but I can assure you that we don't look passively at bad behavior.
Okay, Counselor Branch.
Yes, and thank you, Chief, for working so diligently to start making these policy improvements and adjustments as we move forward. But I want to speak to something, ask a question. This actually may be for our city attorney. I've been in a lot of conversations lately in the community, the conversation about boards and review and things of that nature. But a lot of people don't realize that we have a civil service board. Can Madam Attorney, can you explain the role of that board when it impacts disciplinary actions?
Yes, Mr. Branch. Basically, we're one of 5 cities in North Carolina that has a local act that provides for a civil service board, which is a board that reviews departmental disciplinary decisions. So if in fact there's a complaint against a police officer, it comes to the chief, they do an investigation, it goes through the process, and that person is disciplined. That person then has the right to appeal that decision to the Civil Service Board. And that is a check and balance that we have that's above the chief, and provides employees with additional rights that they don't necessarily have in other cities. So after that, there's an opportunity to go to court. Either the city or the employee could appeal, but whatever the chief ultimately decides, or any department head on discipline, there is another level of review, which is through the Civil Service Board.
Okay, thank you.
I did want to add real quick, that the chief was right. I think that we disclose every bit of information that we are legally permitted to disclose about complaints and discipline. So we're not holding anything back at all. There are state laws that limit what we can tell and what we can't.
Okay, next we have Councilor Knight, then Councilor Melton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for this presentation, Chief. And also I want to thank the city manager as well as you again for putting forward the memo yesterday, and also these ideas. I think the council, I for one support you and the city moving forward in this way to these issues. So I support you doing that, and I appreciate the quick response once we got out of the situation to look at these matters. So I appreciate that. I think there is an interest in, all of us have been talking about this, how to talk about the larger issue of police departments and their missions in the modern world, and in light of what's happened in the last couple of weeks. So I want to continue that conversation. And if you want to respond to that in any way of, the actual mission. And I've started going through your policies and procedures, and I think it's a good idea for all of us too, because it's amazing how detailed and how much there is there in terms of the directives. But at the beginning of it, you do have your mission, and it seems and sounds reasonable on the face of it. But I think there's going to be a lot of interest in how that mission is carried out. And I think this is an opportunity for us to figure out how to reassess or assess if we as a city and the police department is carrying out the mission in the way that that's fair, equitable, inclusive to all of the community. So I look forward to having that conversation with you and us figuring out how to move forward on that. Thank you.
Councilor Melton.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up question to Councilor Stewart. With regard to the enforcement of policies, is there any enforcement language in our written policies? And also, I thank you to staff and to everyone for really elevating those policies on the City of Raleigh website. I had previously gone to look at them, and even I had a difficult time finding them before. So I think having them front and center and clearly labeled is very helpful.
Yes, there is significant volume of policy that speaks to enforcement. And if you take the time to actually look at our policies, it's not a blanket policy that covers all the different actions of the Raleigh Police Department. They are very specific and very detailed, and in some instances, very finite in terms of what personnel can and cannot do. Some policies are specific to sworn, some are specific to all employees, but really delineates duties and responsibilities. Because we are accredited, and I mentioned it earlier, it does afford us to scrub policies probably more often than perhaps some other agencies. And that's a benefit to that, because as laws change, as legislation occurs, be it on a federal level or state or local level, we try our best to make sure that policy is reflective of that. Our mission statement, as with any policy, it's always important that we are putting our best foot forward, and that the pattern of practice versus what's written on paper is critically in mirroring each other as best they can. So that gives us that opportunity to do that as well. And policing evolves like so many other things, and so sometimes policy is changed not so much because of a legislation, but because of the evolution of time. Body-worn cameras is an example of that. It just changes because of where we are in society today, and then there is legislation that speaks to how we will use those cameras. I hope I answered your question.
Any other questions? Okay, I would like to make a motion of support for these policy initiatives and updates, and also thank the chief, her team, and our communications team for working with urgency and transparency on these initiatives. I'd also like to ask the Police Advisory Board to review these policies when they convene. Do I have a second? Councilor Branch?
Yeah, second, and also I just want to say thank you, to the department overall, and continue to work with the community as these evolve. I know you will work diligently with our community and our worship leaders to making sure that all citizens' rights are protected, and that this is just one of the first of probably many steps of evolving as we move into a new normal in our society. So thank you.
Councilor Stewart, then Councilor Martin.
I'm sorry, just a quick clarification question. Are we saying that these policies, or Mayor, your motion, are you saying that the policies need to go to the Police Advisory Board before they're implemented, or?
No.
Okay.
Just that they review them when they convene, just so we have that outside eyes on them.
Great, thank you.
Okay. This would happen immediately. Okay. Councilor Martin?
Councilor Stewart asked what I was going to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Great minds. So, okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that passes unanimously. And I know we don't normally take votes during work sessions, but this was an important, as you said, Councilor Branch, an important first step. And it is just that, a first step. We know we have a lot of work to do. I also wanted to note that today, Governor Cooper announced a task force to address racial equity in our criminal justice system. Speaker Moore had done the same thing last week. I would just like to say that we support both of these initiatives and hope to have a voice in the discussion. So with that, thank you, Chief, very much. Again, appreciate your work on this. And now we will go to the next item on our agenda.
May I just close with one quick comment?
Yes.
And that is, these are clearly unprecedented times. I think we've kind of worn out that word. COVID started it, but this is where we are. And I am very appreciative of our city manager for accepting my recommendation to seek a third party. The policing, the profession of policing and what we've seen, not just here in Raleigh, but throughout the country, I think has put us in positions where this is not routine policing in any way. And so I am looking forward to seeing, what practices we put forth, what were best, and where we learned from these types of events, with the prayer that we don't have these types of events happening in the future. So thank you, Mr. Manager, for allowing us to move forward with that as well. And I have no doubt that we will all learn and be better for it.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you for bringing that suggestion forward. I think that is a really important step as we move forward. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we are moving to a 2020 census update. Christopher Golden from Planning and Development, Sarah Ellis from Planning and Development will update us on that.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Sarah Ellis. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Planning and Development Department, and I'm here to provide an update on how we are ensuring that everyone is counted during the 2020 census. To give a brief overview of what my presentation will cover, I'd like to give you some updates to the Census Bureau's operational timeline as it's been impacted by COVID-19. I'll touch briefly on the importance of the census, some updates on Raleigh's response rate by census tract, a little bit about counting students, our outreach efforts, and then I'll leave plenty of time for your questions. To give some updates on the timeline, the operational timeline for the census, it has been pushed back due to the impacts of COVID-19. Generally speaking, the operations have been pushed back about 3 months. And in the text you see on the left-hand side of my screen outlines the 3 places where the impacts have changed the operation the most. The first is to self-response. So this is for folks who fill out their form either online or in the mail or over the phone. The response deadline has been extended from its original date of July 31st to a new date of October 31st. So this means you can respond to the census anytime now through October 31st. Non-response follow-up will now take place between August 11th and October 31st. This is for individuals who have not completed their census form on their own. They will receive a visit from a staff from the Census Bureau who should be able to identify themselves with a badge and other official matter, and they will knock on your door and kindly invite you to respond to the census and have an iPad, and they are able to help facilitate that response. Finally, there's been a change to when redistricting data will be processed. That is another shift back, so now it will be processed between May 1st of 2021 and July 31st of 2021. This is a change to the original schedule from January 1st of 2021 to March 30th of 2021. We had the opportunity to share with you the importance of the census when we came before you in April. I wanted to briefly touch upon a couple items about why census is important. I mentioned redistricting in my previous slide. Census data is used to determine the number of seats each house in the state, each state has in the House of Representatives. It's also used to distribute billions of dollars in federal funding for a variety of programs, and I'll touch a little bit upon those in the next slide. As I mentioned, it provides the basis for the distribution of billions of dollars in federal funds to programs like Medicaid, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, school lunch programs, which include also free and reduced price school lunches, Section 8 housing, Head Start, and at least 100 other programs that receive information on what the needs of the community are that are derived from census data. Additionally, for every person not counted, the city will lose approximately $1,600 over a 10-year period. So where are we with the count today? I acknowledge that my slide says as of May 24th and that it is past May 24th. As of May 24th was the date that I created this PowerPoint. I do have updated numbers for you. So as of May 24th, the self-response rate in Raleigh was 60.5%. That number has increased to today is approximately 61.3%. This slight gain is about on par with what we've been seeing. So typically, we see a gain, or what we've noticed since the census is open, is a gain in about 0.1 or 0.2% per day. What I'm showing you on the right-hand side of my screen is a map that is available to the general public on the Census Bureau's website. This map has live response data that is updated every day at 3 p.m. with the exception of weekends and holidays, where you can see the response rate by census tract for every tract in the United States. It also has some different geographies if you're curious to see how we stack up compared to other counties in the region. I mentioned this response rate, and I mentioned the date April in my slide because our response rate waning around 60% is on par with Raleigh's self-response rate in April of 2010. April is a significant month for the census because the decennial census takes place in April of every year ending in a 0. which means postcards and invitations to respond to the census typically take place in late March through early April, which is the time that we tend to see the greatest self-response from people who, when they receive their postcard in the mail asking them to respond, likely have an understanding of the importance of the census or feel comfortable filling out the form and providing that information. What this tells us is that, and this says approximately 150,000 households have not been counted. That's referring to people, so that's about 150,000 individuals in Raleigh as of today have not been counted on the census. And again, I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of the website where they could view this information, and it's an interactive website, again, updated daily. To zoom in and drill down on the data a little bit closer, we wanted to show a couple parts of the city that have some of the lowest self-response rates. On the left-hand side of my screen, I have neighborhoods or general landmarks to help orient you to what I'm showing you on the right-hand side of my screen, which is a zoomed-in census map that is showing the various census tracts in Raleigh, and the numbers that you see there are the self-response rates for these tracts. Where you see beige and orange color shading, that is where the response rates are generally lower. Where you see blue-colored shading, that is where the response rates are at their highest, and that is our goal, to turn all of Raleigh dark blue, which means everyone's been counted. The census tract that has the lowest self-response rate in the city of Raleigh currently is Census Tract 509, which is that area that says 35% and also includes Chavis Park and Chavis Park just south of downtown. Additionally, we've seen low response rates in the areas around NC State's campus, which I have some indicators just to orient you to where that is. So the areas around Greek Village and Pullen Park. We also see that response rates have been lower in the neighborhoods of Carolina Pines, Carolee, and Fuller Heights. I also want to say that census tract that has the 40.7% is a bit of a long and skinny tract. So I just called out the Highway Patrol Training Facility because there's a lot of state-owned property as you go further south in that tract. Likely the households are generally located in those areas closer to downtown. And finally, the census tract that also includes Wake Med off of Newbern has rates that are lower than the city's average overall. Now, this is another area that we wanted to call out as well. So in the northeast quadrant of Raleigh, again, I'm showing the neighborhoods and general landmarks in green text on the left side of the screen. On the right side of the screen where you see the map, you can see where the response rates are generally lower, with some landmarks that indicate where they are. So the areas that we're looking at are mostly between 440 and 540 to the west of Capitol Boulevard, to the west of Lewisburg Road, in the neighborhoods around Green Road Community Center, Capitol Crossing, just west of Triangle Town Center. I wanted to touch briefly on students because I thought that was a question that may come up, and wanted to touch on how students are being counted. When I speak to you about these low response rates, these response rates do not include dormitories or other institutions that would be considered group quarters. They include individual units of household living. However, universities are working directly with the Census Bureau to include students who may have returned home after the campus is closed. The same is true for students that are living in either fraternities or sororities. They will be counted individually by their chapter presidents. One of the significant challenges that we may face, however, is students who live in off-campus apartments. If those students have returned home after school closed or they are living at a different location, they should still be counted in the location that they lived prior to spring break. So I ran through a lot of numbers. I wanted to talk a little bit about what our goal for a complete count is. As we mentioned to you when we had the opportunity to present back in April, the City of Raleigh Planning Department is part of the Wake County Complete Count Committee. This is a group of other municipalities, faith-based organizations, businesses, universities, and a variety of other groups that work together for a common goal of making sure that everyone in the region is counted. Our goal as a committee is 82%. We base this goal on the 2010 census self-response rate for Wake County of 78%. I do want to be clear that when we say our goal of self-response is 82%, that doesn't mean that we don't want those other 18 folks to be counted or that we won't continue to work to make sure that they're counted. That's the part where we rely on the Census Bureau staff and those enumerators who will come knock on your door if you do not respond. But our goal is to make sure that as many folks are counted as possible before the enumerators have to go out and knock on doors. I want to touch a little bit on what we are doing to help make sure that folks are counted. The image that you see on the right side of the screen that says "You Count" in black and green. That is a flyer that we've developed, and we've been working on emailing property managers at apartment complexes and all of the tracts that have low response rates and requesting that they put the flyer up either by mailbox kiosks or in laundry areas or just other public places. It includes a QR code, and you can scan it with your phone. It will take you right to the Census Bureau's website, which you can use a smartphone to fill out your census, which is new this year. We're also using targeted social media campaigns, which means paid advertising for zip codes where we know the response rates are low. We're continuing our work with the Wake County Complete Count Committee. We've been placing messaging and utility bills for those that still receive the paper copies. And we've been working with nonprofits and faith-based groups to spread the word, because we understand that the most powerful message or the most powerful tool that we have in our toolkit is a trusted voice speaking to their community. So the census is available in 12 languages that you can respond or receive assistance on the phone in these languages. So that is the text that you see on the left-hand side in green. And then the flyer that you see on the right-hand side of the screen indicates the other languages that, while direct assistance is not available in those languages, there are language guides and glossaries available from the Census Bureau that provide assistance in over 30 languages. So how can you respond? Again, I mentioned you can respond online to the census for the first time. You can do it on a computer or on a smartphone, any device that will connect to the internet. You can also respond on the phone or by mail. And just make sure to include anyone who is living or sleeping in your household most of the time as of April 1st, 2020. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Councilor Branch.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. The question is, when the cards were mailed out, there's a code that you would enter to fill out online. If someone has lost their card or that code, if they go online, what should they do? How would they identify themselves?
Sure, they can simply put in their address, and the address the Census Bureau has a listing of all addresses, and that's where they're pulling that response from, so their address would work just the same as the code on the card.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Cox.
Yeah, I assume at some point the census results will affect our district boundaries, and would that happen before the next election? What's that process like?
Sure, you're speaking of congressional district boundaries?
Well, no, I'm talking city district boundaries, council district boundaries.
I can speak to when the data would be ready. I can't speak to the process of how council district boundaries are allotted, but that's something I would be happy to look into and report back with more information.
That'll be fine.
Councilor Stewart.
Thank you. Sarah, quick question, and this may be something that one of our other partners is taking on, but wondering if we are reaching out to all of our local radio stations to make sure that we're reaching those target audiences who really live in those precincts that or census tracts that we're seeing low response rates from.
Yeah, we have reached out to the ones who will provide free advertising. We've been working with the county, and we sent them a list of all the radio stations. It's actually a follow-up item that I'd be happy to check in and see how they did with that list.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, one thing I was happy to hear was the door knocking. That might be the most effective way to get people's attention. I mean, there's a lot of distraction right now with everything that's going on, but this really is important to the future of our city. So I think the door knocking piece could be the way to go. So thank you for mentioning that. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for this update. Our next matter is interlocal funding, the wake room occupancy and prepared food beverage tax update. Jim Green and Allison Bradshaw will be providing this.
Mayor, members of council, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to come today and give you an update on the hospitality tax, or what many call the interlocal funding. Allison Bradshaw and I our CFO, have been working with partners over the past couple months to review our revenues and our hospitality tax and the impact of the COVID-19 on those revenues. With me today in the council chambers is Denise Foreman, Assistant County Manager, and Denise works closely with us and helps lead the process. Also with us is Denny Edwards, who tremendous partner providing data for the report today and helping us review the revenue sources. Denny, of course, is President and CEO of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And finally with us today is Mr. Tom McCormick. Mr. McCormick is chair of the Centennial Authority that oversees the PNC Arena, and Jeff Merritt. Jeff is the executive director of the Centennial Authority. So I appreciate them being here today and being partners throughout this review. So clearly COVID-19 has impacted all aspects of the economy, but in particular impacted travel and tourism. And we want to share some of that information with you today and go over a presentation. And this is really not a fun presentation. You're going to see throughout the impact of the virus, and these is requiring staff to make some difficult decisions, and City Council and the County Commission to make some difficult decisions. Next slide, please. So the purpose of today, we want to provide an overview of the COVID crisis and the impact on the hospitality and tourism community in Wake County. We've worked hard again with our partners to revise the revenues for the hospitality taxes given those impacts. And we want to share those with you today, and Allison will go over that with you in detail. And then we want to discuss the 22nd Amendment recommendations that was presented yesterday to the Board of Commissioners and today for City Council for you to consider at your next meeting. Just as a reminder, it's the City Council and the Wake County Board of Commission that oversees the hospitality taxes, and you approve the use of those taxes in the interlocal agreements, or what we call the amendments. The 21st Amendment was approved just last August. Hopefully don't bring another amendment back this soon, but with the impacts of the pandemic, we felt we needed to do so. Next slide, please. So this gives you an idea of the impact of the tourism of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism in Wake County. You can see that we've had 164 cancellations of conventions, meetings, and groups, sporting events, about 190,000 attendees that would have visited Wake County did not attend. That's about 130,000 room nights, to impact a loss of about $81 million. So again, a tremendous impact on our economy. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19, you can see that hotel occupancy is down about 64%, and the average daily rate that the hotels charge for their rooms down about 40% from the prior year. At the height, we had 20 hotels that temporarily closed. Good news, 4 of those have reopened in the past week, so we still have about 16 hotels that are closed, and tremendous impact at the airport. No one is traveling now. Next. Appreciate Denny Edwards and his team providing us this information. The top line, the yellow line, you can see last year the room occupancy rates for our hotels. And the bottom line in blue, the impact of the COVID-19. So this time last year, we were averaging around 80% occupancy in our hotel. That has declined to a low of, you can see, about 25% in April. Good news, you're seeing a little bit of an increase there, but we're still down by double digits when compared to this time last year. Next slide. This is the average daily rates, Again, the yellow, you can see that average daily rate averaging around 105 to a high of about $125 a night. And the bottom line, the impact of the COVID-19 virus, cutting those basically in half. Again, the positive news, a slight increase over the past few weeks, but again, a 28% decline over the average daily rates from the same week last year. Next slide, please. Let me call on Allison now to go into a little more update on the numbers.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Allison Bradshaw here from Finance. I'll take the next few slides to discuss the efforts of the small work team that researched, discussed, and ultimately recommended the revenue projections. And as Jim just mentioned, these businesses within Raleigh and the county have been extremely impacted by the pandemic, and as such, the revenue forecast has changed dramatically. So just a quick refresher on hospitality taxes. Wake County has authorized and levied a 6% occupancy and 1% prepared food and beverage tax. These funds are specifically for projects that support arts, culture, sports, and convention in the county. We often receive the question, are these revenues available to be allocated for the many other needs in the community? And by legislation, this tax is not available to be used for other needs. For another point of context, in 1995, the revenues generated countywide was $12 million. And as we ended last year, 2019, the gross revenues were $60 million annually. So our hospitality industry has seen significant revenue growth during this period and is a vibrant cross-section of the local economy. So Jim mentioned council as well as the Wake County Board provides oversight, and the oversight process is completed via a series of interlocal agreements, the last one being the 21st Amendment, which was signed in August of last year. And I do want to take a minute to ensure that you and interested residents are aware that the county has a dedicated web page to this subject, and the website is at the bottom of the slide, and it helps ensure transparency given the interest across the county in the use of these taxes. So the review team has been instrumental in the previous years and has served as a sounding board and represents the larger community and interest groups. Those entities are listed on the slide, and as Jim mentioned, this group is led by Denise Foreman, the Assistant County Manager, who quite frankly has done a phenomenal job in leading these efforts of the team to bring us where we are today. So before I get into the numbers, so this team has been monitoring revenues. I think I can at least speak for myself, some of us almost on a daily basis since the impact of COVID. We've reviewed industry data, listened to experts, paid lots of attention to the executive orders and the impacts on these businesses, and reviewed information from economists. Again, all to project, or at least attempt to project, the impact of the pandemic on these revenue streams. So this chart is really telling. The picture on the left shows the monthly occupancy tax distributions, and then on the prepared food and beverages on the right. The colors may be a little hard to see, but the light blue line is 2018, the lighter green is 2019, and the darker green is 2020. So you can see that when compared monthly, each year has similar cyclical patterns, and that 2020, sorry about that. And 2020 had been a very strong year with the darker green line tracking on a monthly basis higher than the prior 2 years. And then all until the early impacts of COVID began to be felt in late February. And you can see the dramatic fall off in March and April collections, really to historic lows. So we've taken the monthly figures and shown the dollar impacts in this chart specifically for FY20 and 21. So as I mentioned on the last chart, FY20 was tracking along very well, in fact, higher even than our FY20 adopted budget. And if you take a look at the last column on the chart, you see that FY20 and FY21 projected impacts to gross revenues. So specifically for FY20, it is anticipated the gross revenue loss to be about $14.5 million. In 21, the projected gross revenue loss is $17.8 million, and that total two-year anticipated revenue loss is just over $32 million. So this chart takes that information and shows the projected revenues out through FY25 and also the FY19 actuals. So based on the work of the small team, it is projected that it'll take 6 years to return to a level of revenue equal to FY19. We obviously model very conservatively, and all of us hope that revenues will bounce back sooner. However, for purposes of the latest forecast, we modeled a very slow recovery. When you compare the projection against the models used in the 21st Amendment, we are anticipating that over this 6-year window, the lost revenues will reach $97 million. So before I turn it back to Jim to discuss the recommendations for a 22nd Amendment, as a result of the forecast and just, quite frankly, the structure of the legislation, I wanted to take a minute to show the revenue losses to the city and our partners, and these impacts are before any recommendations to project spending. So over the next 2 years, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is primarily funded as a % of occupancy collections, will see a revenue loss of $3.9 million. Centennial Authority will see a loss of almost $1.9. The town of Cary will see a loss of almost $800,000. And Raleigh, which specifically uses this allocation for debt service, maintenance, and operations, will see a revenue loss of $17 million in 20 and 21. And when I look at the revenue loss specifically for Raleigh over that 6-year period, the projected amount equals approximately $50 million. So tremendous revenue declines projected through FY25 from where we expected to be with the 21st Amendment. So I'll turn it back to Jim to highlight the recommended project spending changes as a result of the revenue shortfalls. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. So again, difficult decisions here when you're facing revenue shortfall of approximately $32 million, you need to make some significant changes, and that's where we've been working with our partners over the past couple months to put these recommendations together. So these are the recommendations that would be part of the 22nd Amendment. I'd like to go through each of these, and we tried to divide these into 3 different categories. You see remove, which is just to eliminate as a project or from funding from the model. You have update, which is a change in the recommendation from the 22nd Amendment, and a delay to push it back in the model to allow for more flexibility. First, medium and small projects. The medium projects, you can see $46.6 million. That was a competitive process that was approved as part of the 21st Amendment. That $46 million really coming from cash in the model, and with the impact of the COVID, unfortunately, those funds are not there. So the recommendation is to end the process with no recommendations for medium-sized project funding. Small projects, very similar. That's $2 million a year that's allocated to the county. The county commission approves the funding for this competitive process. It's typically smaller projects, $100,000 or a little more. And with the impact of the virus, the $2 million that was included for funding in FY21 is recommended to be removed. There is funding included in FY22, so hopefully that small project funding can start back. The Town of Cary Indoor Sports Complex was recommended as part of the CVB destination study. and approved by council and the county commission several months ago. That project also was a competitive project, and the town of Cary was selected. In working with the town of Cary, they are still committed to that project. It's important for youth athletics and to draw tourism to Wake County. They're still committed, but they've asked to push that project off for 1 year. So you can see in the delay that the funding for the town of Cary will be pushed back 1 year, starting in FY22 instead of FY21. The town of Cary, just like the city of Raleigh, received some maintenance funding. With the situation we're in, the recommendation is to reduce that payment of maintenance for their facilities by $1 million. We put it in delay because at some point we hope the revenues are back and that maintenance money is important. We'd love to put it back in the model, but we just feel we have to remove it at this point. But it's always been a priority to take care of our facilities, so we want to continue to watch that. Next, you have the PNC Arena. I think most of you have seen reported the Centennial Authority is working very closely with the Hurricanes and have come to an agreement to extend the lease for 5 years. So there's 4 years in the existing lease plus the tentative extension of 5 more years would run this through 2029. In the 21st Amendment, it was approved for the arena to receive $9 million a year to help with their capital improvements and operating expenses. Based on the new lease information, what is recommended here that get through that 9 years with the $9 million commitment for the arena to improve and take these some of these operating costs. But in FY30, that $9 million is moved to another line in the model titled Planned Future Sports and Entertainment Facility Capacity. The reason for that is to allow the arena, the Hurricanes, the city, the county, and other stakeholders to evaluate what this community wants as a future arena. Several options. You can put money in the existing arena to upgrade, build a new arena at the current location, or find another location for the arena. By 2030, the arena will be about 30 years old, and it'll be time to start looking at some improvements or a new arena. One last thing I would say about this, this item still comes back to council through an interlocal agreement between the city, county, and the Centennial Authority. So the $9 million that is recommended here as part of this amendment would not be allocated until that tri-party agreement comes back to you at a later time. The final thing on this page is the future capacity. The model at one point had excess revenue that we could program. It was not committed to any particular project, but there was about $3.1 million a year beginning in FY26. We recommend eliminating that. Next slide, please. This slide focuses on changes at the convention center complex. I mentioned the maintenance for the town of Cary. The city also receives hospitality funds to maintain the convention center and the performing arts center. Recommendation is to reduce that by $1.4 million at the RCC and the performing arts center for about $750,000. Land acquisition, City Council authorized the purchase of land just across from Red Hat next to the convention center. As budgeted, a part of the hospitality funds was $14 million. We negotiated a price of about $11,300,000. So the savings goes back into this fund. Let me skip optimization and go to the music venue. The recommendation is to remove in the 21st Amendment, it included funding for a music venue, no particular location, and that was planned for FY25. The thought was at some point the convention center will expand to the Red Hat Amphitheater site, and we would need another site for the outdoor amphitheater, but at this point there's just not funding available for that planned project. The last three I'll talk about: optimization, hotel parking infrastructure, and convention center expansion. These three items were recommended as part of the destination study for convention center improvements. First, optimization, $5 million was included to plan and construct improvements to the convention center that would help maximize the use. With the financial situation we're in, the recommendation is to cut $4.5 million, the construction, and only retain the $500,000 so we can look at designing these improvements to hopefully implement and construct in the future. The hotel parking and infrastructure project, still a priority. Money was included, as you know, to provide for a public-private partnership for parking and infrastructure to help bring needed hotel rooms around the convention center. The recommendation is to delay that project for 2 years so that funding would be pushed out from FY23 to FY25. The last item is convention center expansion. That was recommended to and planned to occur around FY28. Again, with the financial constraints in the model, still a priority to expand the convention center. A lot of support for that, but the recommendation is to push that back 2 years as well to FY30. One last comment I'd like to make on the hotel. As you know, Council's been very supportive of the hotel project and downtown development project on the parking lots in front of the Performing Arts Center. With the financial implications and having to delay that parking support, also with the need for the city now, with what we're learning from the COVID, to be able to go back and review the impacts on the hotels, work with the stakeholders here and evaluate what that means for the future, and to look at changes in design. We feel it's important to terminate the process for the hotel at this time. As council remembers, we had hired JLL to proceed through a request for interest process. We have not received any proposals at the city or any information, but because of where we are financially and with programmatic review, without objection from council, we feel we need to terminate that contract with JLL and terminate the RFI process to give us more time to evaluate in the coming years. Next slide, please. So our next big review for the model, and when I say big review, we have over 100 stakeholders that are involved in reviewing the revenues and recommending projects, was originally scheduled for July 1 of 2022. We, with the situation we're in now, we felt we needed additional time, so we're recommending that that be pushed back 1 year to July 1, 2023 timeframe. Next slide, please. And so moving forward, our presentation, council has this information and a memo that summarizes it. The county commission received the same presentation yesterday, and we did it with our stakeholders this past Friday. Next steps would be to bring this 22nd amendment back to the county commission on the 15th next week, and on June 16th, the city council. The thought would be to put that on a consent agenda, but we're happy to answer any questions that you may have or provide any additional information. With that, we'll take any questions.
I just wanted to get clarification on something. You said the the convention center would be 2030, as well as PNC Arena or a new arena. That actually allows us to look at these things together and holistically. From a timing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, moving forward, there's flexibility. Obviously, we have to continue to evaluate the revenue and the impact of the pandemic on the revenue, but it does give us time also to evaluate the entertainment complex, the arena, the expansion of the convention center, the hotel. So it does give us some time to review all that as well.
And we don't know what COVID will mean for the convention industry going forward either.
That's correct.
Okay. Councillor Cox had his hand raised first, then Councillor Stewart.
Yes, I have some questions about the PNC Arena. If I remember correctly, Amendment 21 made a commitment of funding the arena for $9 million a year for 30 years. And now we're reducing that to 10 years effectively. So that's a significant reduction in commitment. So I'm wondering who's making that recommendation and what are the reasons behind that?
So you broke up a little on me. I apologize, but I think you were asking about the funding for the arena. So in the 21st Amendment, the commitment was for $9 million. I believe it was 25 years. 25 years. And so based on the new lease, Mr. Cox, in working with the arena, our recommendation is to allow that funding for the 9 years for the existing lease and for the extension. So it allows, again, that opportunity, as the mayor was mentioning, the funding to support the arena and to look at some upgrades for fan experience and some other things that are needed to keep that arena competitive so we can draw NCAA concerts and other events. But then past that, over the next 9 years, it also gives us the opportunity to discuss and evaluate what does the community want, and making sure that we're looking at those opportunities. Is it to continue to invest in a 30-year-old arena, build a new arena, do something in another location? So that's why that money in year 10 was moved out, but it's still in the model. It's just not shown as part of the PNC funding. It's shown in that different line for fiscal year 30, but it remains in the model.
Okay, now you say it's our recommendation. Who do you mean our? Who's making this recommendation? Because this is significantly different from what we had in August.
City staff.
And the commitment 25 years from now, today, is no different than it was in August, regardless of COVID. So I'm wondering, who specifically is recommending this change?
Yeah, Mayor, if I could, I'll answer that question. This is a joint recommendation from myself, the city manager, and the Wake County manager, based on work with the various stakeholders and the discussion. But obviously, it's like any other budget recommendation. The council and the commission could choose a different path.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay, we had next Councillor Stewart, I believe. Is that correct? Okay.
I actually had a different take on the PNC Arena. So first of all, thank you for the presentation, Jim. It looks like every other bucket where this money goes is either delayed or significantly cut, except for PNC. That one is kept at $9 million, even though it's for 10 years now. It's not like it's delayed 2 years or it's cut down to $7 million. And so I'm wondering if there was a reason.
Yes, ma'am. So the recommendation is based again on the lease discussions that have occurred between the Hurricanes and the arena. And as city staff reviewed it along with county staff, we felt that that was an important investment to make for the community to continue to support the PNC arena, to look for those upgrades, again, to improve fan experience and make it a competitive arena, but also to continue our partnership and have the Hurricanes part of the community for 9 years.
Just a follow-up to that, one thing that I do want to see from PNC is a financial plan and the list of improvements that will be made over the 10 years with estimates of the cost. I don't think it would be responsible of us to approve that until we have that in hand. So I think that would be helpful for all of us to have. And also, this is the first the council is hearing about the new lease agreement. Perhaps it might be, it's been in the paper, but Jim, perhaps it might be helpful to go into that a little deeper.
Sure. With that, Mr. McCormick or Mr. Merritt are more familiar with the lease discussions than I am. I'll see if they would like to come up and give you some more specifics on the lease agreement.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's kind of strange being here, actually. I'm used to being right over there. I'll try to adapt to this. The lease agreement goes back to about 2 years of negotiations with Mr. Dundon, the current owner of the Hurricanes. There seemed to be a great impetus here in the community that we want the Hurricanes to stay. Having a professional sports team is one of the indicators that you are a major league city. Raleigh is that. And so it's just one more thing to add to the panache that exists from having that. The original, to go back to some of Mr. Cox's questions, the original proposal for 25 years for $9 million would have contemplated a much greater addition or number of enhancements to the arena. However, there was no way that the Hurricanes were going to agree to having a 25-year lease extension. So we were faced with the conundrum of trying to figure out a way to keep the Hurricanes here, keep the arena open for concerts, NCAA, all the community events that occur there. And so this seemed to be a very elegant solution to doing that. So we got a 5-year lease extension, which keeps the Hurricanes here. They made commitments to us in terms of maintaining, for example, midpoint of the salary cap. You know, they didn't do that for a long time, and they had really bad teams for 10 years. Well, they've been good the last 2 years, and they'll be in, if the playoffs ever get started this year, they'll be in the playoffs. They made commitments in terms of what they will contribute for charitable causes in the community. They're going to continue doing at least what they used to do and perhaps more. They have agreed not to discuss moving with to some other city for the next several years. And if they do leave after the end of their current lease, then they have to pay back any operating assistance we may give them over the next 5 years. So again, it's a compromise. It's not a 25-year solution, but as Mr. Green correctly pointed out, the building will be 30 years old at the end of this. So the options appear to me to be, and to our board, I think, to be very clear. We either do something major at the end of this, and this doesn't have to go 9 years. The idea here is that this is a time period in which the community can say, what do we want? What kind of a building do we want to have? Do we need something else? Does it need to be somewhere else? Does it need to be a different kind of building? This gives the opportunity to do that. This could happen, say the mayor and the chairman of the county commission end up appointing some sort of group to look at this or whatever, but from the hospitality community as well. This could be something that in 2 or 3 years, we'd come back and do amendment number 23 or 24 and do something else. But this solution here buys time. Take a look at that and do that. It does obligate the authority, and we already do this. We've already done this for 20 years. We assume some operating expense at the arena. Under this agreement, we will continue to do that and go forward. So I don't know how much more detail you want to get into to the lease, but hopefully that helps.
I think that does help. Does anybody have any follow-up questions to Mr. McCormick's comments? Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have constituents that are tremendous Canes fans, and they just want to be sure that we're not reducing our commitment and potentially risking losing our team, and then also, reducing our commitments for a great venue for concerts and all the other events that you mentioned.
No, Mr. Cox, absolutely not. As I say, one of the driving forces behind this agreement is to keep the Hurricanes. And we will also have the funding. We will not be able to do a major $100 million enhancement, but we will be able to maintain an arena that's as capable as any in the country for concerts, NCAA basketball, any convention needs that may be there. So we're going to have a good arena. It's going to be as good or better than it has been, and we will have some guarantee the Hurricanes will be here.
Okay.
So assure your friends of that.
Yeah, Mr. McCormick, I think you did a really good job working with Tom Dundon to come to this agreement. It is a compromise. I've talked to a number of people about this, and nobody got 100% of what they wanted, which is usually the sign of a good agreement. So I commend you all for the work you've done, and also Tom Dundon committing to keeping the team here. Having once worked for the Carolina Hurricanes, it was the first time we went to the Stanley Cup playoffs. I can tell you there was nothing more exciting than seeing playoff hockey in Raleigh, and I think we all got to experience that last year again. So I commend you for the work you've done, and thank you for outlining that for everybody listening. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you for all your support over the years.
Thank you. Okay. I also know that Denny Edwards is there in attendance, and Denny had the county commission yesterday. I just wanted to ask if he had anything he would like to add.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. Denny Edwards with the Greater Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau. And first, I just want to thank and compliment the work that went behind this with both the county and the city Raleigh staff. There were countless hours that were involved with this, and they did listen and got a lot of feedback from the partners in the community. I'll just add, Jim rolled out a lot of dismal numbers, and unfortunately, I think tourism and leisure industry was the first industry that took a hit when COVID-19 really came to the United States, and we will likely be the last to recover. The U.S. Travel Association indicated that COVID-19 is worse than 9/11 and the Great Recession combined. And the impact that it's had on the travel and tourism industry. And certainly what we're experiencing here in Wake County is no exception. Jim laid out the impact that we have currently encountered with the number of conventions and sporting events. Unfortunately, those numbers are going to continue to increase. We have a few conventions and sporting events that are hanging on really for the last 4 months of the year. but there's a lot of uncertainty right now in terms of what mass gatherings look like. Indoors right now, as you probably know, is only 10 people. So if you think about it, that's impacting everything from weddings to large conventions. And then we should be in the height of our events, concerts, festival season. All those have been canceled as well. And then really anything in the Performing Arts Center has been canceled. So you think about why people come and visit Raleigh and Wake County, it's all those great amenities that we have that unfortunately we're not able to accommodate. So we've got a lot of meeting planners and event organizers that we're in discussions with now for the latter part of this year that are very close to canceling just because they don't know what their capabilities would be if they come here to Raleigh. So what we are seeing is a little rebound in leisure travel. The leisure market, I think what we always have to remember too is we're not only facing COVID-19, but we're also in a recession. So a lot of people are strained on financial and personal resources. So it makes it difficult for people to even think about taking a long vacation. We're somewhat positioned well in that because you look at the leisure market, a lot of our leisure market comes from about a 4 to 5 hour drive radius. So we believe that the leisure market will probably bounce back the quickest. Corporate travel, which we depend on a lot, particularly during the week, is a real challenge. You've got a lot of corporations and organizations that are stressed financially. So they're kind of holding back from sending their employees on the road. And even if they can, there is a confidence factor that employees are having on terms of whether or not they want to travel. So we believe corporate travel will be a little bit slower. And then the meetings and conventions and sporting events will likely follow, hopefully starting to rebound in 21. I will say we have a lot of interest. We continue to have a lot of dialogue with meeting planners and event organizers. There is a lot of interest, and we are getting some bookings for 21 and beyond. So once we rebound from this, I feel like we are going to be in a good position to recover. But if you look at the amount of recovery that it took for 9/11 and the recession, it does take about 5 to 6 years to recover, and we don't believe this will be any exception. So, but believe me, we are hard at work. We're continuing to brand the destination and having a lot of dialogue with our customers to assure them that we're up and running. Once we get some clarity in terms of what the limitations are, we're able to handle them and appreciate all your support as well. Be happy to answer any questions or turn it back over to Jim.
Are there any questions for Denny? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Are there any other questions? I think we're good. Jim, thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the presentation. So I am going to ask council members, can we just take a quick 3-minute break? Okay? Thank you. Please mute. is the community engagement consultant introduction. Linda Jones will lead this, and then we'll hear from Mickey Fern.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I'm very excited to come to you today to introduce Mickey Fern as the selected community engagement consultant. You have his full bio, but I would like to highlight some of his major accomplishments. So Mickey Fern has been a public servant, parks, recreation, and conservation professional for over 50 years. He has served as a professor of practice in the North Carolina State University School of Natural Resources since 2013. From 2009 to 2013, he served as the National Park Services Deputy Director for Communications and Community Assistance from 2008 until 2013. His responsibilities included community engagement and outreach, communications, public affairs, strategic planning, youth programs, international affairs, partnerships, legislative and congressional affairs, policy, state, and local assistance programs. Before his tenure at the National Park Service, Mickey worked in Seattle, where he held positions as Director of Innovation, for which he managed the creative energy of Seattle's 10,000 employee workforce. He created and facilitated a citywide idea management system and created and led Seattle's Facilitative Leadership Institute. He also served as Executive Director of the Neighborhood Leadership Program, for which he established a Citizens University to improve public process and relationships between Seattle residents and their elected officials. In addition, he led Seattle's transformation to inclusionary public engagement. And finally, as a manager of Seattle's race and social justice, he created the architect for the country's initial municipal equity initiative. He led the mayor's initiative to end racism and create equity in the city of Seattle. So today I introduce to you and to the community Mickey Fern, who will come and share the scope of work, his vision and perspective on how the city of Raleigh can achieve the best outcomes in the community engagement process. And on behalf of the staff, we are looking forward to working with Mickey and also engaging in our community.
Hello, Mayor and Council, and it's been a blessing and a curse to sit through this experience. It's been a blessing because it reminds me of the complexity of your work and the unbelievable work you have to do, and it's kind of a curse to kind of understand just the power of the things we're going through now. But I'm excited to be a part of this at this time. I'm Mickey Fern. I live at 201 Lord Berkeley Road, area code 27610 in East Raleigh. My hope is that this discussion can be aspirational, that based on what you've just talked about, I'm hoping that at least this discussion can generate some aspirational feelings and some excitement. And I applaud you for sticking through it, through these very difficult times. I know you've got very, very serious budget problems, and to stay with the funding of this is like really important. But I really believe that in the long term, a great community engagement and a great community becomes Raleigh's competitive advantage. This May completes my 53rd year in public service. I work for the City of Oakland as Director of Volunteer Programs and Community Resources. You heard about the Innovation Project in the City of Seattle, where I was charged with managing the creative energy of 10,000 employees. And then working with the Neighborhood Leadership Program. After I did innovation work, City Council called me and said, Mickey, we're finding citizens increasingly irritating. And we're wondering whether you can come up with something that will somehow make citizens less irritating. And my response at that point was, well, in a democracy, I think it's citizens' right and responsibility to be irritating. So I don't know that we're going to make them less irritating, but what we can do is to get them to understand how democratic process functions. Then I worked at the National Park Service, and I guess it was 2013, Mary Watson, the Dean of the College of Natural Resources at NC State University, invited me to come here. My wife and I were sure that we would only be here for 2 years. We're coming from the West Coast where, sometimes, and this isn't fair, but we have this belief that there's no intelligent life east of I-5. And so we came to Raleigh, and we thought we were going to be here for 2 years, and 7 years later, we're here. We bought a house. We're going to be here. I have been during that time working with several people in the city of Raleigh, working with Scott Payne and Stephen Bentley and Torrey Spa and Parks and Recreation, working with Kate Pierce and the Dix leadership team and Sean Malone around the creation of Dix, and working with Megan Anderson around sustainability in the city of Raleigh. I'm looking forward to working with Dr. Caesar, the Director of Equity and Inclusion, and the other city department heads. I appreciate the support I've been given by Marshall Adams David, Larry Jarvis, and Linda Jones. I want to start by saying democracy is not a spectator form of government. Democracy is not a form of government where we sit by and watch people do it. When I worked for Jerry Brown in 1977, one of the things that we realized is that citizens had abdicated their responsibility to get involved in government and just given that responsibility to public service servants, but then were routinely criticizing public servants when they got it wrong. And we found out the way to do that is to create something called inclusionary participatory democracy, where citizens are involved in the design, delivery, evaluation, evolution of their programs and services. And we find when they get involved in those things that they become enabling rather than regulatory. So if we can have the PowerPoint presentation now. All right. The first thing I want to do is to kind of get straight, and we can talk about this when the presentation's over, if there's a question and answer period, to understand what it is you're asking me to do. And my understanding is that you're asking me to facilitate a process that uses and focuses the collective creativity, energy, talent, resources, wisdom, and commitment of the council, our public servants, our community organizations, and our residents to inform the strategic evolution of Raleigh's community engagement, structure, activities, processes, and systems. That's my understanding of what I think you're asking me to do. I'm not coming in as a consultant to tell people how to do things or to tell people what's best. I'm here to create a process in which we get the most out of the collective wisdom of everybody in our city. A question that I ask myself is, do our current public engagement activities and approaches reflect the demographics of our city? The city is 58% white, 28% African American, 4% other races, 4% Asian, 2% two or more races, 0.3% Native American, and 0.7% Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. We have 49% renters. So the question I'm asking myself is, do our community engagement activities approach this demographic? My wife and I have been recently taking long walks, and one of the places we walk is Lake Johnson. And I don't know how many of you walk around Lake Johnson, but it's the most diverse thing I'm ever part of. And I think to myself, how will we get our community engagement activities to mirror the diversity that I see walking around Lake Johnson? But this is the question. So I want to start by creating some perspective. This is what I've come up with and what citizens are entitled for the significant investment they make in their government. They're entitled to access and engagement. They're entitled to transparency and quality. They're entitled to value. They're entitled to stewarding their resources. They're entitled to responsiveness, and they're entitled to accountability. In my career, one of the things I've learned is that government is largely invisible work. And I actually learned about invisible work when my wife asked me to stay home with my children. When she went to work, if she came home and the house looked anything like it did when she left, she would ask me this horrible question. And that question was, what did you do all day? And what I realized is that's not a question, that's an accusation, is that I don't see any evidence that you did anything today. And government's kind of like that. It's like citizens recognize government when it breaks. They don't recognize government by virtue of all the things it does. My son works at Nike, and he's doing pretty. And for the first time, he had to pay taxes. And he called me up, and he was just livid. He said, "Dad, they took 30% of my money, and now they're asking me to pay $5,000 more dollars. What the hell does government do?" And I said, "Man, you're talking to the wrong guy. I mean, you're talking to a guy who's been doing his work his whole life." But he had no understanding of the reason his lights come on or the reason he can drive. He had no understanding of those kinds of things. But when people do acknowledge government is when it doesn't perform the way they think it should. So I want to kind of set some context about this. In the work I've done, especially in creating new things, Picasso said this: for every act of creativity, there's an act of destruction. And for the most part, people will always focus on the destruction, not focus on the possibility. And my sense is that as we embark on this journey, that's going to be a part of the problem, that people don't know what's in the future, but they know what they're going to lose. So what we need to get people to sort of look at is looking into the future and not looking at what's wrong, but looking at what's possible. I've recently been, as a Parks and Recreation person, I've recently been looking at American society and how to live powerfully in American society. And I made this list of when I love Americans, when Americans are at their best, when they're celebrating, when they're in laughter, when they're playing, when they're responding to crisis or catastrophe, when they're coming to each other's aid, when they're engaged in experiences with their cultural tribes, when they're doing service or volunteering, when they're worshiping, when they're collectively grieving, or when they are proud of their community. That's when America's at its best. And all of these things are about gatherings, and all of these things are about engagement, and all of these things are about people coming together. So do we believe, first of all, that community engagement is an investment, not an expenditure? It's an investment in our community. It's not a budget expenditure. Do we believe that residents extend our census? Their daily activities and the places where they work and play enables them to see, hear, and touch and experience things government can't always see. 500,000 residents take in more information in a day than our 7,000 employees possibly can. And the other question is, are we responsible for creating the next generation of big citizens and civic stewards? So our charge, and I'm asking these questions, it sounds like a statement, but I'm asking these questions, is our charge to create communities that reflect our commitment to an inclusionary, participatory democracy in which all citizens are engaged in the policy, budget, and design decisions, and to create and sustain communities that are resistant to factionalization. Splintering and factionalization, I think, is the enemy of democracy. When people begin to live in a diverse world and they believe that they can't handle that world and they begin to live in exclusive cadres, that splintering in that segmentation paralyzes democratic process. When splintering and segmentation occur, there's a tendency for residents to attach themselves to a segment or splinter and to become an advocate for a very narrow constituency. Residents believe that they would be better served serving themselves. So what is a community, and what is it that we're trying to get to? Community engagement is critical to building community in which community members rise above their self-interest for some collective good, are mindful of the collective impact of their individual acts, are constantly mindful of how their actions, good or bad, impact others. They extend their love, respect, trust, credibility, generosity, and philanthropy to people outside their affinity groups. They look out for each other's interests, and their behaviors are aligned with common values. Capacity building. Another one of my experiences in dealing with innovation and creativity in government or in innovation creativity period, is when people come together to do something new, something they have never done before, something they have never encountered. It seems that their IQ invisibly drops, but their arrogance stays the same. The arrogance blinds them to new challenges and possibilities. They rarely pause to understand what they need to learn in order to move forward. And what I'm suggesting is, as we do this, the council needs to stop, the community needs to stop, staff needs to stop, and think about what are the things we need to learn before we can start on this journey. Engagement. Sometimes there's a belief that there's a certain amount of disengagement that should be expected and is therefore acceptable. All citizens are free to engage. If they elect not to, they should be expected to live with the consequences of that disengagement. But we really need to look at how citizens calculate return on investment or invest in their time and energy in public process, and what helps them calculate a return on investment and what keeps them from being able to see the return on investment. So what are citizen responsibilities? Council has responsibility, staff has responsibility. People don't often talk about the responsibility of citizens. They have responsibility to vote and engage in inclusionary participatory democracy, in which citizens have multiple opportunities to engage as citizens, partners, customers, and co-creators. And in that light, there was recently a book written, and I actually thought that I acknowledged the person who wrote the book, but I don't see it here, where we need to look at citizens in several ways. We need to look at citizens as co-creators, participating in an innovation system about government evolving. We look at citizens as customers. And we need to increase the potency and capacity of the thousands of daily transactions between residents and their government, because I think most citizens get their idea about how they feel about their government from those daily transactions. We have to have citizens as partners. Residents are appropriately engaged in design, delivery, evaluation of programs and services, and in budget activities. We need to look at citizens as investors, investing in their communities, and have a reasonable expectation for what their investment gets them. We need to look at citizens as big citizens: vote, participate, civic stewardship, volunteer service, youth projects, youth engagement, and then we have a responsibility for developing young citizens. Defining community engagement, and I did some of this presentation a few years ago, and I'm trying to understand how we all look at community engagement. Is it a legal obligation in the planning process? Is it the process of building and sustaining important relationships? Is it gatherings to get information about policy, program, and budget decisions? Is it the consistent two-way flow of information between government and residents? Is it the thousands of daily transactions that occur between residents and their government? Is it about building and sustaining community kinship, stewardship, and community spirit? Is it a vital component of the city's commitment to continuous learning? Is it harnessing and focusing the intelligence, creativity, and energy of 500,000 residents? And I think we need to come to some conclusions about what we think it is, because if we don't define it the right way, then we may be guilty of coming up with inappropriate solutions. So these are all the things that citizens have interest in. I live in, and some of you have heard me say this, I live in 27610, where the lifespan is 13 years less than the lifespan in Briar Creek. If I, as a citizen, wanted to get involved in working on that and changing that, if I wanted to get a group of people together to work on that, where would I go? And I'm not sure I would know where to go. And citizens might not only be interested in those kinds of things, but we know they're interested in zoning, environment, ecology. You can see the list there. The question is, are we giving citizens opportunities to get engaged in the things that are important to them? Are we? Because that's what they have passion about, and that's what they will dedicate their energy to. So how will we create a system that looks at all of the interests of citizens and creates opportunities for them to get engaged in the things that they are passionate about? This was a model that created the Race and Social Justice Initiative in the city of Seattle. The city of Seattle for years was a pretty mono-ethnic city. The population was 80% white. It was 10% African American and 10% other. Over a period of time, there was an unbelievable rise in complexity, where we ended up with 85 different ethnic groups that spoke 135 different languages. And our question was, can we manage this new complexity with our already existing programs, cultures, habits, beliefs, assumptions, predispositions? Can we manage this new complexity with that? And for a long time we tried to, and we found out that it could not happen. So in my experience, what happens when people get more complexity than they have ability? Panic sets in. Panic sets in when the mind succumbs to stress and fails to take in information about an unexpected or threatening event. And there's this thing called reversion to last learned behavior. Unable to reach an informed judgment on what to do next, we reach in our memories for what worked well before. And there's some great things that have worked well before, but if we rely on those things, then my experience is that the future becomes an extension of the past. This is the Green People model, and this was actually the model that created the Race and Social Justice, the first municipal equity initiative in the country. So what we found out, we looked at our public process, and these are green because I had to use a color. So what we found out is the only people who participated in the public process in the city of Seattle were white adult homeowners. Because they want to look out for their investment, for their most important investment. And so white adult homeowners, which are the green people there, let me go to the next slide. All right. So what we have, I got to go back. Okay, thank you. No, next one. Okay, all right. So what happens is green people send information to government, knowledge, information, energy, and resources, which is also green, and programs and services come out of the other side. So if you've got green information coming in and green people making decisions about how we're going to allocate our money, how we're going to make policy decisions, then the programs and services that come out of the other side are going to be programs and services that are attractive to green people. We also find on the other side of the grid that most of our partners are green. So it's sort of a locked system. But there's a barrier there, and behind that barrier are all kinds of people: renters, young people, ethnic groups, demographic groups. And the question we had to ask is, what is it that's keeping those people from getting engaged in public process? Well, as a green organization, and to that degree, I was a green person, we decided that we need to give those people outside those barriers opportunities to assimilate into the green culture, and then they'll be okay. But the reality is these groups, and by the way, these groups used to be called minority groups, and I refuse to use that word anymore because these groups have rich histories, cultures, ethnicities. They are not minority people. We demonize them when we call them minority people. So our challenge is, what's in that barrier? What's in that barrier that's keeping those people from getting engaged? And the reality is the green people don't know, and the people behind the barrier don't know. So we need to create conversations or experiences in which we begin to learn what the things are that are in the barrier that are creating the exclusion. I teach a class up until 2 weeks ago, because my contract's over. I taught a class at North Carolina State, and we talk about what is normal. What is normal? People like to think of themselves as normal because when they think of themselves as normal, they think of themselves as right. And the conclusion that we came to is that in American society, and certain in our community, there's no such thing as normal. This is what our community looks like. For ethnic and cultural groups, for demographic groups, for all of those things, they think they're normal, and they operate according to their concept of normal, but their concept of normal is in conflict with other people's concept of normal. So how do we build the capacity of residents to not only live powerfully, but to enjoy the experience of living in a truly diverse society? So there's some capacity building we've got to do. We have an obligation to have an in-depth understanding of how race, ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic status, and other defining and other defining demographics impact community engagement and stewardship. We again have to design and implement activities that increase the engagement of marginalized citizens to city programs and services, inclusion in community and citizens engagement activities, and other things that affect this project. So when I was in the city of Seattle, and the mayor sent me out to find out what was wrong with community engagement, we had neighborhood councils, and the neighborhood councils were created years ago, and they did unbelievable work. But the city evolved in a way that the work of those neighborhood councils changed. And when I went out to talk to people about why the neighborhood councils weren't working, when I talked to the people on the neighborhood councils, they said, well, the problem is there's a small group of people who do everything. And when I went out and talked to people in the city about why they didn't engage, they said, because there's a small group of people who do everything. And so both people are looking at the process as exclusionary. So there's some questions. In a city where a good percentage of residents are satisfied and content, why would they get involved? How do we tap into the passion that they have about the issues that are relevant to them? When residents make choices about how they use their discretionary time, they make a calculation of return on investment. How do we ensure that civic stewardship and community engagement give them a significant return on their investment? This is, I was trying to think of something I could use as a graphic to understand how this has changed. 20 years ago, there was one kind of community engagement. 20 years ago, there was one kind of mustard. There was French's mustard, and we put it on everything. I just went to Wegmans recently, and I looked at the mustard, and there are like 30 different kinds of mustard. And I'm thinking about that as it relates to community engagement. There cannot be one kind of community engagement that's tied to planning and project development. There are all kinds of community engagement. And if we're looking at mustard, we're happy that we have those kinds of differences. But when we look at government, I think we tend to rely on things that have historically worked. So in community engagement, or the community engagement process, there are 4 pockets. I actually stole this from my wife, who's a marketing person who worked at Starbucks, and she said, you know, in every market, there are aware users. Those are people who know your product and use your product. There are non-aware users. There are people who sort of get involved, but they don't know what's going on. There are aware non-users, people who know you exist but don't use you. And then there are non-aware non-users. My concern is that the fastest growing group as it relates to community engagement are non-aware non-users, people who don't know and people who don't engage. The process, it's important to realize this is really important to me, that the process of what we do to do this community engagement work is a product of and in itself. Anytime anybody engages, their engagement, depending on the quality of their engagement, they will either decide to stay engaged or to not engage. So the content of what we're trying to do is important, but the process is just important because the process determines whether or not people will stay engaged. So here's the tentative sequence as I look at it. And understand, I'm presenting this as thoughts, but this won't really be real until we get city staff and community people engaged. we have to form teams. We have to form an internal team. We have to form an interdisciplinary team of internal and external people. So we have to form teams. We have to conduct a stakeholder analysis to understand who's engaged, who's not engaged. Who do we need to engage in beginning to learn? Who do we need to engage in preparing for this journey? We need to create a new vision. We need to prepare for the journey, which means we need to go through the process of learning and understanding what exists, but not being paralyzed by the past, understanding the past, but using that to understand how we move forward. We need to conduct an internal and external community engagement assessment. We need to make recommendations to the council. We need to facilitate capacity building for participants, and we need to engage the community. So I did this wrong. It's left to right: forming teams, preparing for the journey, facilitating capacity building, conducting a stakeholder analysis, conducting internal and external assessments, engaging the community, creating a new vision, and making recommendations to the council. But we can't wait for 10 months for us to understand what we're trying to do. So that there are some things we need to experiment with while we're involved in this process. We can't wait to the end of this process to have things change. So what we will do while we're in this process is to provide technical assistance to agencies and organizations that are currently doing community engagement work. I've mentioned this to a couple of you. I think we need to, I would love to use Dix Park to do this, even though it's not ready. I believe we need to establish a community welcoming center where citizens new to Raleigh can come once a month and get an orientation to exactly what Raleigh is. I've been here for 7 years. I'm a Parks and Recreation person, and I've just discovered the Greenways. So can we create a situation where as people come into our community and they're excited as they come into our community, to capitalize on that excitement by creating a community welcoming process somewhere that gets them information about what's in the community and how the communities work. Everybody's concerned about whatever the replacement for CACs are, and I'm not sure that's the right question, but we can't wait 10 months for us to figure out how we're going to create this process by which the things that the CACs did well continue to happen, but we have opportunities for people to do things outside of that. I've been talking to some foundations in the city about creating a community innovation fund where they provide small amounts of money for citizens who want to engage in experiments around civic stewardship and about community engagement. Youth engagement and creating big citizenship, we need to work on that right away. And I believe we can create opportunities for community service projects with an emphasis on youth services project while we're involved in the protracted business of the project. So I don't believe we can wait 10 months before we decide to do things. I recently read a book that talked about how corporations, especially technology corporations, are using the concept of minimally viable products. And that is that they put a product out before it's ready. And the reason they put it out is because they have faith that the market will correct whatever is wrong with the product. So what I'm saying about getting started right away is we need to stay with the sequence of what we need to do, but we need to do these things because these things allow us to make progress. We make progress while at the same time we're learning. So that's the presentation. And so if you've got questions or concerns, let's have a discussion.
Okay, that was a lot to take in. Thank you, Mickey. We had Councilor Branch first and then Councilor Knight.
First of all, I want to say thank you for the presentation and coming on board and leading us in this effort. I definitely do believe we need certain things we need to do to get started. And one of the questions I have is, as individuals that want to be engaged and start finding ways to be part of the process, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I want to be careful about this because I think you're asking me to be an expert. And I said earlier that I think we really need to get the teams and city staff together to have that discussion.
Okay.
But I think we need to provide opportunities for people to get engaged in the things that are important to them. And that's why I was talking to a foundation in town about providing $50,000, $100,000 to create an innovation fund so that we can inspire citizens to begin to come up with creative ideas that they think will be important in terms of building their communities. But I want to be real careful about not being prescriptive. I don't want to get out in front of the internal team. I want to get out in front of the interdisciplinary team because I think that's where that intelligence comes from.
Councillor Knight.
You might be muted.
Here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mickey. First of all, I'm incredibly impressed by your experience and background, and you seem to me to be a perfect person or type of person to help take us and lead us through this process. So I'm happy to have you. Look forward to working with you, and I think the rest of the community feels that way or will feel that way once they get to know you better. I don't want to say this council is clairvoyant, or anybody else that wanted to start this process. But I think the last couple of weeks have shown, and the pandemic before that have shown that our old model was old and outdated and could not handle the evolution of where the city is, for better or worse. And I think we are at a point now, and you talked about this during your presentation, that we've got to do things better in terms of civic engagement for all the reasons you just discussed. And I think what you have presented to us and set up gives us that opportunity to do it, because we have got to be more inclusive, broader, more diverse in terms of how we deal with the city and how we're listening to our citizens. So I look forward to doing that because this is hard work, and we're at a time and a place in our city's history that we have got to step up and do a better job, and this is obviously very timely in doing that. So I look forward to it, and I look forward to working with the rest of the community on this. Thanks so much.
And I think we need to realize that the CACs provided a very important function, and they're critical in the evolution of the process. In other words, we had CACs, they worked, sometimes they didn't work, but if it wasn't for that, we could not be here. That the CACs are a necessary part of the evolution for us to get where we are now. And it's not to say that they still don't have value. One of the challenges I understand about the CACs is that different CACs did different things. So citizens didn't exactly know if they had a concern, whether their particular CAC would handle that concern. But the reality is that the CACs were a critical step in the evolution of us trying to get this right.
Okay, we have Councillor Martin, then Councillor Cox. And we have Councillor Stewart's cat making an appearance.
It's starting to become a regularity. Thank you so much, Mickey. That's a lot for us to think about over the coming weeks, and for us to take back to our constituents. I think one of the things that I want to highlight, and whether you react to it now or if it's already something that is part of your plan and thinking and strategy, is that as we move forward in this process, and I think it gets to your strategy and your illustration around the green people, which I love that illustration. It is that, we have an opportunity to hear from so many different types of people in this moment. And I think to Councillor Knight's point, there is this moment in particular is really interesting, where everyone is being tested in terms of how we are responding and meeting the needs of our residents, online, offline. How are we really showing up for folks? And when we disbanded the CACs, it certainly left a hole in District C, where most of our 8 of the 10 CACs were in the city, and where there was mostly Black leadership there. And so I think, as we move forward, acknowledging that what I would really like, especially in District D, knowing that, I have a large Black population here as well that is rarely ever involved in the CAC structures. When we're moving forward, that while we do involve folks that were involved in CACs, because there is so much to learn there, and they are the folks that tried and were putting in the hours and the work. I think if we can start from an intersectional framework and start with the folks that are struggling the most to find the time and the resources to be involved, that if we build from that point, that we are fundamentally going to catch everyone else as we climb the engagement ladder, and that we will inevitably find ways for everyone to plug in and be involved. So I think that kind of taking the Kimberly Crenshaw theory here and implementing it in our work as we move forward, and not just hearing from one subset, which I know you won't do, I'm sure, but I really just want to see an intersectional approach here and ensure that we, especially from the outset, are not just hearing from the people that are most likely to knock on the door or submit an application to be involved in this. I think it's incumbent and an imperative for us to go out and do the work and find out exactly how we're going to ensure that the city is showing up for people. And I think this moment in particular with COVID and the ongoing, tensions that we're seeing around race and police is proving that we have to think differently. Thank you.
So one of the things we need to think about is there's a significant amount of our community engagement that's tied to projects and planning, right? And I think I mentioned to somebody on the phone that in the city of Seattle, we found out a sidewalk in Seattle, a mile of sidewalk in Seattle costs $300,000 more than a mile of sidewalk in Tacoma because of public process. We can't have our public process tied to projects and planning. We also have to be careful about getting citizens involved episodically when we need them. In other words, I believe we need to create sustainable relationships with citizens where we engage with them all the time so that when we want them, they're there. So the question that I was asking myself the other day is, what happens in a situation where, for whatever reason, you can't be transparent or you can't be forthcoming? For legal reasons or for other reasons, what happens in those situations? But if citizens don't trust you, if citizens trust you, they will allow you sometimes not to be transparent because they really believe that you're doing the work that they want you to do. But if you don't develop and maintain those sustainable relationships with citizens over time, if you're only calling on them when you need them, or if they're only participating when they're angry or afraid, that's not going to work for you.
Councillor Cox.
Yes, Mickey, thank you for being here again. In February, this council withdrew every ounce of support for the CACs. And there have been, over the years, hundreds of people who have volunteered to work with the CACs, to help organize meetings, and run the CAC meetings and special events over the years. And many, many more people have participated in the CAC by attending meetings and being involved in those events. The CACs, despite all the support being withdrawn by this council, are continuing. I've met with many of the leaders of the CACs, and they are trying to work through the COVID-19 situation, and several of them I know are setting up virtual meetings and plan on continuing to meet. So my question is, under this exercise going forward, will the members of the CACs and the people, the general public that valued the CACs and attended those meetings, will they be welcomed as part of this process? Because I'll tell you right now, they're not feeling very welcome.
Yeah. Well, it would be suicidal for me not to involve those people. I mean, suicidal for me as a citizen, as a consultant. My intention is to meet with as many people as I can, including the CAC people. I was just having a conversation about the value of CACs and getting people out to vote, you know, and all kinds of things like that. So my commitment is to go out and talk to people about what they're doing, about what it is they want to accomplish. Is there another thing that needs to happen that's not called the CAC, but that does some of the things that CACs do? But I don't want to get out ahead of myself, because the only way I can figure that out is to go out and talk to people and use the collective intelligence of those people to try to work that out. But I have every intention of talking to everybody that I can about how they think we need to do this. But when I said, you know, for every act of creativity, there's an act of destruction, there will be people who will want to go back to the way it was before. And I'm not sure how we would deal with that. But to answer your question, I absolutely intend to, one of the first things I do after I get city staff together and to get some understanding about how we're going to approach this thing, is to start meeting with the CAC people.
I would like to know more specifics about how we build that welcoming environment, because I'll tell you right now, folks are not feeling very welcome.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I want to make sure I don't get on the wrong side. The CAC people are not feeling very welcome now, but there are thousands of people in the city of Raleigh who haven't felt welcome before. So the question becomes, how do we get everybody to feel welcome? So there are a lot of people who haven't been engaged, who didn't feel welcome, and now there are people, because things have changed, who don't feel welcome. Then the question is, what do we do to get everybody to feel welcome? And Councilperson Cox, I'm not telling you I got the answer to that. I'm telling you that I'm willing to facilitate a process by which we do everything we can to get as much information as we can to address that.
All right, sir. We'll make you earn your money.
Thank you.
Councilor Melton.
Yeah, I had my hand up, but I hate to ruin it. I think we left it on a really good moment. I just wanted to reiterate, I do think that some of the most civically engaged folks have been involved in our CACs. I said this back in February, and I remain committed to it, that the folks who show up to the meetings and the chairs and the co-chairs, I think there's great value in the investment that they've made. And I'm really glad to hear you, Mickey, say that the CACs were a step in this process and we wouldn't be where we are without them. And I agree with Councilmember Cox that we should be doing everything we can to make sure that they feel welcome and included. And I understand that there are hurt feelings right now. I really do. And I hope that we will all be able to work together to build something great for the future. And so I'm really looking forward to it. And I look forward to this process.
Yeah. And I also want to reiterate that that I'm a resident of Raleigh. You know, I've been here for 7 years. It's become my home. I think there's some terrific things that are going on in Raleigh. I might be working on this even if I wasn't a consultant, because I just know the importance of building community. So I just want you to know that I approach this as much as a citizen of Raleigh as I do as a consultant.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? Okay, Mickey, I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you and going on this journey together. I think now more than ever, between COVID and the incidents that have happened in the last week, incidents of violence and racism, we are all ready to go on this journey and make a difference. So I'm glad we will have you helping.
Yeah, so if I can say one more thing, we're in a situation in this country I don't think that's ever existed at any time in the world. Between COVID and between the sort of civil disturbance, I don't think we've ever been in this situation. And I find it sort of troublesome that citizens believe that you have the answer to this, because we're at a moment of time that's never existed before. This has never happened before, and I think that citizens who believe that you should immediately have the answer and that you should start making decisions before you understand it, I don't think that's a good idea. But I think what we need to do is we need to look at it and we need to learn, and then we need to adapt. So I really appreciate your trust. I really appreciate your trust and confidence, and I look forward to working with you all.
Okay, thank you, Mickey.
Okay.
Okay, that was the last item on our agenda for this evening. I know this was a full meeting with a work session, but I think we move forward with some important steps with the police department and policies that we're moving ahead on, and emphasizing, putting that on our website, that information, so people, our residents, can easily see that and see what we're working on. Again, mention the urgency and transparency that our police department have responded with. And we really appreciate that. Also want to thank everybody for being here today, listening, and we are on this journey together. This is our moment, and it's an opportunity. Let's take advantage of it. With that, I adjourn the meeting, and thank you all.